Mr. Kugel and Ms. Devenish are excused, and we're expecting Alder Holmquist.
Item number 3, approval of the minutes from March 9th. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Is there a second? Is there discussion? Additions, deletions? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, minutes are approved. Appearances, is there anyone here who wishes to appear on an item that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll close the appearance section, move on to unfinished business. Public hearing for Royal Capital Group on a proposal for a general development plan, GDP, for lots 2 and 4 of CSM number 8819 at 1208 and 1210 East Broadway for residential and commercial mixed-use development, including 223 residential units and approximately 30,000 square feet of commercial space in 4 planned buildings. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Kevin Moore, president of Royal Capital Group. Royal Capital Group, in conjunction with the Whitehorse family, are seeking to redevelop the Whitehorse family of properties located in the Broadway East Corridor. A little bit of background on Royal Capital. Royal Capital was established in 2010. Since then, we've gone on to redevelop roughly 400 units of housing. Totaling roughly $55 million in total investment costs. In addition, we were brought in as development partner or consultant for an additional 100 units of housing outside that portfolio. We've been working within a small, strong niche whereby we like to work with assets that are either idle or assets that are not performing. In either case, those assets may not be achieving their highest and best use. For example, we began the process of acquiring non-built apartments on the south side of Madison in 2011. That asset had many, many challenges. Starting with high crime, the development was built in the mid-1970s, had not gone through any kind of significant rehab, had a partnership group that consisted of over 100 limited partners from across the country, and it has many challenges, let's say. It was very close to being deemed as a public nuisance, where the municipality issued a public warning to the developer and the ownership group at that time. But we entered into a purchase and sale agreement in a very, very unique manner that had 2 major caveats. One was a long due diligence process. The second was we wanted the ability to approve all new leases and all renewing of existing leases. It kind of put us in the driver's seat before we even had the assets to kind of get this thing stable where we needed to go. The long due diligence process allowed us the opportunity to get into the community. So it allowed us to work with Captain Ballas and Chief Noble Ray about ways that we can improve the safety of the development. It allowed us to work with the school district and the school statistician to find out exactly how many children are in a particular development and what can we do as far as our redevelopment plan goes to encourage a safe, quality learning environment for those kids. And also we got an opportunity to work with the neighborhood organizations about just things that will make this development a nice place to call home in the future, outside of just the bricks and mortar of being a reconstruction development. So we began the construction process. Inside the units, we did new kitchens, new baths, new flooring, new carpet throughout, new landscaping, all the good stuff, to kind of make it exciting again for people to call this their home. By the time we got ready to start construction, though, let me double back. We also built on the site a community center, which is a very, very important component for that particular deal. Again, work with the community to find out exactly what would help this development achieve its highest and best use. The community center includes a fitness center, a computer lab, community gathering area, amongst other things. We have a on-site tot lot now, and we have a basketball court and soccer field. Again, make sure that we are creating an environment that's very, very kid-friendly and an overall quality and safe housing opportunity for our residents and these families. By the time we began the construction process, though, the occupancy had went down from 85% down to 40%, and we were perfectly fine with that. And that was mainly because we were not apprehensive about enforcing our very, very firm and strict but fair tenant selection criteria, which allowed the development to really weed out some individuals that wasn't contributing to a safe, quality environment. We completed construction. That development now hovers between 98% and 100% occupancy. And the police calls have reached double-digit and sometimes 50% reductions in comps from summer to summer, winter to winter. So that development is one success story that we speak of, where we walk into communities and find out exactly how can we best utilize what's existing to kind of create the highest and best use. But enough about Madison. We're here to talk about Monona tonight and exciting things you guys have going on here. We're here tonight to talk about the general development plans known as Broadway Square, Living and Entrepreneurship Campus. And we want to get some general feedback from you all about that. We're going to begin the evening with Jonathan Brinkley from Excel Engineering. Excel has served as both the design and engineering for this development. So he's going to talk about site, landscaping, building materials, building heights, and things of that nature. Then we're going to follow up with Terrell Walter. Terrell will come in and talk a little bit about the overall community engagement that we've been involved with since we began this process. I'm sorry. Before Terrell, James Carlson will come up. James Carlson represents School Factory. School Factory is a group out of Milwaukee that works nationwide with entrepreneurship centers, like the one we're proposing here. And they're going to help us out with both development and execution of this entrepreneurship hub that we're looking to build amongst this campus. Then Terrell will come up. Steve LeClaire was on the agenda for tonight to come in and speak. He represents City Real Estate Advisors, which is one of the primary investors into the development. Unfortunately, he ran into some flight cancellations coming through Chicago, so he cannot be here. But he did draft him a nice letter that I don't want to have to read to you guys. So we'll submit that for me so you guys can have that as well. And he definitely sends his regards and would like to schedule another time to be accessible as well, to kind of talk about some things that they've seen in their communities that they've been developing in, how this follows that trend, and why they believe housing makes sense here. So nonetheless, we'll begin the presentation. I'll pass the floor to Jonathan and keep going.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for your time here tonight. I was here, I think, last summer when we presented this in the first initial round. And I'm pleased to report back with some updates that we've made. I'd just like to give you sort of a tour of what it is that we're talking about. And I'd like to start at the site level. We have two physical lots here in our GDP. Lot 4 right here, and then Lot 2 encompassing this area. There's a third lot of the gas station, which is somewhat part of our GDP. It's an existing building that's there, an existing lot, but we don't really propose to change much about it. So I'm going to focus mostly on Lot 4 and Lot 2. Just to give you some site context real quickly, I'm sure you're all familiar with where this is at. This is UW Health here. This is Menards across the street. This is a wetland area, and this is the Beltline right here. Our 4 buildings are labeled in order that we would plan to construct them. Building number 1, building 2, building 3, and building 4. Building number 1 is scheduled to be a 5-story building. It would be clad in 40% masonry and 60% fiber cement siding. The top 4 floors would be residential apartments, and the ground floor would be a combination of indoor parking and commercial use. Building number 2 would also be a 5-story building, very similar in construction, similar materials, similar architectural character. Top 4 floors would be residential. First floor would be entirely commercial, and this particular building would have a basement with underground parking, the entire floor plate. Building number 3 is this pink building here towards the north end of the site. It would be a small standalone retail building with approximately 3 tenants. It's positioned up near Broadway for high visibility, making the highest and best use of that portion of the site. And then building number 4, this purple building, way down towards the south end. This would also be a residential building, again, similar in character and material usage to the other two apartment buildings. The top 4 floors would be residential, and the first floor would have parking at grade. So a little bit about how we set up the site. With our 2 first residential buildings, we need to be able to balance commercial use and residential use. And our primary tool for that is to locate the residential entrance and residential parking to one side of the building, and the commercial use and commercial parking to the other side of the building. So we set up building 1 to have residential entrance here. There's room for fire truck and school bus to come through this area to the drop-off, swing back around, exit the site. Commercial use would be on this side, and access to our underground part or our at-grade enclosed parking would be down at this end of this parking lot. So as we expounded on building 1 here, we had the same design drivers with building 2. How do we have people in a mixed-use building? How do we have the residential users enter one portion of the building and the commercial users enter the other part? And this is something that's typical with any type of mixed use, mid-rise mixed use, is how do you separate these 2 uses and make it compatible? So when we took a look at this scheme that we had set up with building 1, it seemed natural to us to face the commercial portion of building 2 towards the commercial portion of building 1. The parking, the hours, the traffic would be synergistic here in the middle, and that would leave us the residential parking and residential entrance side to the more desirable environmental corridor here off to the west. We touched on building 3 here just a minute ago. Again, it's positioned up near Broadway for its highest and best use of the site. Building 4, the challenge with this lot is to make good, solid use of all of the land area. And because it's so deep and narrow, this part of the site really presents a challenge. So as we were setting up this scheme with, commercial on the interior of the site and residential on the outside, that seemed to work really well for us to take traffic down through the center of the site and make use of this portion. As you can see, if you were to navigate down here, the fire truck and any other vehicles can swing around the building entirely and then exit out without having to do any type of more difficult wide turn type maneuvering. From there, we took a look at entrance to the site. Obviously, filling up the entire site with improvements necessitates moving vehicles in and out of the site. And with there already being a median cut through Broadway right here, this seemed the logical place to put the main entrance to the site. Last time we were here, and we were only talking about Lot 4, we were using an access easement that goes along with Lot 4 here. Today in this scheme, while we have that, it's not really a primary way to get to building 1. This could be a right in, right out, but the bulk of the traffic would be directed to this main entrance. We've left room at the throat opening of the curb cut to have a left-hand queuing lane so that people turning left wouldn't stop someone from getting out who wanted to turn right. Wanted to touch on stormwater management briefly. Prior to our first meeting, we did contact Darren Pope with Veerbicker. Our civil engineer wanted to compare notes with him and make sure that we were on the same page with viewing this site as a redevelopment site. And he confirmed at that time that yes, it would be considered a redevelopment site. So at that point, we had all the information that we needed, and we could go into the ordinance and calculate what our approximate storage volumes would be and what our treatment volumes would be. The site is set up to drain parking lots over land to catch basins with underground piping, pipe that water to biofiltration areas. That's this little area here and this area here. After treating it, then discharge it to a wet pond for further treatment and storage, retention, and then it would eventually, because it's located in the low part of the site, eventually discharge to the wetland where the water naturally wants to go. We have the stormwater management set up in a two-phase scheme. So building 1 could be constructed with its own improvements, and then as building 2 is ready, the stormwater management system for the entirety of lot 2 could then be constructed. We wrestled internally with parking a little bit. We did our own rational calculations, and we felt that we actually needed less parking than the ordinance required. But for purposes of appearing before the Plan Commission, we wanted to hit the quantity that's actually required by ordinance. We wrestled with that quantity and then with green space, and we basically balanced our building programs so that we had the correct amount of green space, the correct amount of parking stalls. We're looking at it from the standpoint of one general development plan. We have one building on one lot, and then we have 3 buildings on another lot. We're here today because the commission asked, hey, let's look at the big picture, and so that's really what we're doing here. So we're looking at the big picture of parking, we're looking at the big picture of green space. It's a difficult calculation to forecast which green space goes with which building, and so we feel very comfortable that having met the ratio for the development as a whole, we've met the intent of the ordinance. Finally, just a little bit about pedestrian connections. Those are very important to us. Commercial here and commercial here would require some type of connection between the two. We've connected with sidewalks here. We've created a small outdoor courtyard space where people could go and have lunch. We also want residents to be able to get to the public sidewalk. So we've created a sidewalk connection out to Broadway. We also want residents of this building to have access to the same. We've created a pedestrian way here, splits, and it can go out here, or it can make it to the public sidewalk there as well. On the staff report, the Veer-Bickery report actually, we saw there was a suggestion that we look at creating a bike path to the nearby park, which is something that we certainly welcome, and we would like to do in future meetings with staff. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to James.
I'm going to show you some visuals for this. Awesome. So my story starts in 2002 in Milwaukee. Prior to that, I had worked in technology and business, a lot of experience working with small and large-sized companies. But I decided to do something a little bit different with my life, and in 2002 in Milwaukee, I started a place called Bucket Works. And Bucket Works is a health club for the brain, basically. Think of it that way, right? And the physical space was a creative workshop people could use to create different things: a computer lab, a event venue, an art gallery, a law office, and a coffee shop. And so we've been running this facility for 13 years. And what's come out of it in that time has been hundreds of members, people who join this place to take advantage of the resources, and partners who use it to grow businesses, art, all different types of creative outcomes. 90 new startup companies have emerged from this place. Maybe about 30% of them have not continued, but that's a pretty acceptable ratio for this type of thing. 800 to 900 events in a year on average, ranging from classes to workshops to public discussions on community growth, education, thousands of works of art and culture, even a couple of weddings so far. Now, something really interesting has happened across the country. Right? Back in 2002, Bucket Works was really the only game in town providing this type of place to a community. And then in 2007, more and more communities around the U.S. began to explore the possibility of collaborative space as a part of the city. And I'll tell you, just today, I was over at Gateway Technical College, where they're hosting the U.S. Fab Lab Network Symposium. So I don't know if any of you heard of a Fab Lab. It's sort of another type of digital production environment. MIT designed it. And so there are folks there from all over the country sharing ideas and practices about how to create places like this where entrepreneurs and technologists can build new ideas. And so it's my firm conviction that bringing this idea here to Monona will really put Monona on the map and invite it to become part of this wider national community of innovative spaces. And so the way we're going to do that is with a place called B Square. And the mission is to foster community, innovation, and entrepreneurship, building and sustaining growth in the new economy. So let's look at how that actually works. B Square has 3 dimensions in its program. The first focuses on entrepreneurship support. The second focuses on collaboration and health. And the third on creative production. These 3 dimensions bring a member community into the space who use the resources and infrastructure there to build their own ideas and initiatives. It also invites the wider Monona community to participate as guests and participants in all the different activities that will happen, and it generates outcomes that affect both those 2 communities as well as Monona as a whole. So let's take a closer look. In the entrepreneurship dimension, there are 3 features of the space that provide support to entrepreneurs. The first is co-working. Co-working has become a really important trend in terms of supporting independent professionals. A lot of times people are working on a business at home, they're by themselves, and they want to go to a workplace environment where they can associate with other professionals so that they can build their idea. Co-working provides that with desks, meeting rooms, conference space, high-speed internet, and other infrastructure that independent workers need. Also, mobile professionals and people coming from out of the area will stop off here on their way to do business elsewhere, right? I mean, you're 10 minutes closer to Milwaukee or 10 minutes closer to Chicago than Madison. So if I want to go here, I want to start here, right? Now, let's say I've joined the co-working space and I'm working on an idea and I want to take it to the next level and actually grow it into a real business. We're going to put an accelerator program inside this space. What that does is give these entrepreneurs access to mentors who are experienced and successful already to help them take their business concept from an idea into a reality in a very short time period through an iterative design process. Now, once the business has reached a certain level of growth, it can join in the incubator, which will provide private office space for small teams and also for existing local organizations that might want to be a part of the energy at B Square. What this does is draw in that member community. When you look at the sorts of people who use places like this around the country, there's startups and entrepreneurs, there's creative and design talent who are attracted to environments like this, the mobile and independent worker who's looking for a place to set up a desk and work, small businesses, individual adults and families also take advantage of these environments, and of course students and youth. We want to show kids what work looks like in the 21st century, where it's highly connected and networked, and places like this are a great place to learn that type of work culture. Some of the outcomes that it brings to Monona is new businesses. So it's easy to start a new business in this type of environment, brings more jobs, and also fosters social enterprise, companies that want to do good and do well. Let's take a look at the second dimension. This focuses on collaboration and health. So in this are 3 aspects. First, a cafe and commons. So there'll be a coffee shop on site providing coffee, tea, bakery, sandwiches, social areas for people to meet. Again, it's very convenient to be able to bring a client for my new company to a place like this, have coffee, and then go and have a meeting in the conference room in the co-working space all under one roof. A fitness center will offer tenants of the residential component as well as members of B Square and their guests access to treadmills, free weights, shower, and other fitness infrastructure. This is really innovative as we look at the different spaces. Right now, I work directly in a mentorship capacity with about 100 collaborative spaces, and we provide fiscal support, financial management for 59 of them, and 0 of them include a fitness component. So this is really innovative and sets Monona apart. The third aspect is event and meeting space. So this is gathering spaces where speaking engagements, presentations, large and small meetings, parties, and family events can take place. You know, some of you may have seen TED Talks online. There are TEDx events that take place in various communities. Let's imagine TEDx Monona, where the best ideas from this community are featured and people come to celebrate and learn from those people who create those ideas. That dimension brings in the wider Monona community to participate in B Square. So families, guests, students, visitors to Monona, and area businesses, as well as nonprofit groups and arts and culture groups who might use the gathering space for a fundraising event or an art show. So it's a diverse group of folks that will take advantage of that. Some of the outcomes that brings: community integration. This isn't just an island off in the corner. This is a place people think of as essential to their lives, and they go there and use it frequently. And of course, the dimension of celebration, which is really important in a collaborative space. The third dimension is creative production. Three core aspects here. The first, the makerspace. So makerspace is a collaborative environment equipped with tools such as 3D printers, wood shop, metal shop, laser cutter, textiles, so that folks can use that infrastructure to build new products, to create artifacts for personal utility, rapidly prototype. It's used by youth and adults as well as for personal and business use. As I mentioned, there are about 400 makerspaces in the country. The upside on that is 48,000, because that's how many libraries there are. And the idea, and it's happening very quickly, is schools and libraries are thinking about converting themselves into or adding makerspace components. A lot of schools are exploring STEM learning right now. This makerspace will give the schools in Monona an opportunity to embed directly into that type of environment and get exposure to adult professionals who are building and creating new products. The second aspect is the community kitchen. This is a licensed production facility with full-on professional kitchen gear that can be used by area businesses to prepare foods on a large scale. So if I want to start a food production business, I have what I need here. If I'm running a catering business or I have a food truck, I can, again, operate that using this infrastructure. This will also provide opportunities for training and education classes related to food production. And then a food court. The food court gives us a place to sell the food that's being produced in the kitchen and other locally produced food created by members there, and as well it'll host classes and have food programs and events and things of that nature. So some outcomes that come from this dimension are products and invention, healthy residents eating healthy food, and the net is innovation for Monona. Now, we've looked at how this works, and you're of course wondering, how does it sustain itself? So in our work, again, with a number of these communities across the country, we've identified several dimensions that tend to apply to these collaborative spaces, and at least 5 apply directly to this model. Membership fees that are charged to area members who want to use this space, so they might pay a monthly fee, as well as tenants who will pay a monthly fee or see that prorated in their rent. Contract services that are provided by the community who are members in the space, as well as the space itself. So again, I'm a small business locally. I've got this part. I need to have a prototype printed. I want to see if it works in my machine. I can take it down to B Square and get that thing made. Third dimension is corporate sponsorships. So a lot of area businesses, large and small, will put sponsorship dollars behind this idea because they'll find it indispensable, again, to their business success. Grants and donations, and then event rentals, all of which create a diversity of revenue streams that helps to guarantee the future sustainability of this. I really think when you look at the national context for this type of idea, this will put Monona on the map. It will make your community more visible to the types of innovators, entrepreneurs, and creatives who want to live here and grow. That's B Square. Turn it back to Terrell.
Thanks, James. Good evening, everyone. As Kevin alluded to, I will be discussing community engagement and, more importantly, how we've been working with local as well as regional individuals and entities to make this general development plan better. One aspect that we understand as developers is that whenever you decide to develop a multifamily housing development, you're going to have some residents that choose to not own a vehicle, or they may choose to utilize public transportation as their main mode to get from point A to B. With that said, we're very excited to know that Monona actually offers a transit option with Monona Lift as well as Monona Express that does make circuits throughout the entire Monona community and get residents to downtown Madison, etc. So we wanted to find out a little more about Monona Express and Monona Lift, just to see did they have any interest in increasing ridership and how it could be of a service to Broadway Square, excuse me. So what we did, Kevin and I decided to meet with Mark Hotacker, who met with us, and he also informed us that they did have a need. The Monona Mass Transit Commission did have a need to increase ridership. In addition to that, he felt very positive about there being an option to add a stop to service this development. So we asked Mark if he would be able to have that discussed at one of the Mass Transit Commission meetings, and it was actually on the agenda for March 18th, where Mark informed us by phone that it did get very favorable review, and that they did actually agree that a stop can be added once the first phase of this development is completed. Of course, showing that we have interest from the resident base that they will help increase ridership. So this is very exciting for us because it shows us that Broadway Square will have the same level of public transit access as the other multifamily housing developments within the greater Monona area. Additionally, we wanted to take a look at our commercial space. And although we know that there's a great demand for the co-working space as well as the maker space that we're going to offer within B Square, we've never operated off of the principle of if you build it, they'll come. So we went out to make strategic partnerships with individuals like James Carlson, School Factory, and Bucket Works to ensure that we have a model set up that's proven to be sustainable and have longevity for these type of spaces and that'll last here in the Monona community. In addition, for the incubator and small office space that James referenced, that'll hold or house small businesses up to 4 employees, we wanted to make sure that the companies that come into that space, they'll be companies that can contribute to and benefit from the type of energy we want B Square to house. So what we've done, we began to have conversations with a broker by the name of Kent Yan for Plato Real Estate, who actually specializes in working with small businesses and finding their home, essentially, their location where they can grow and where they can thrive. In addition, as mentioned, we'll have a cafe as well as a bakery on site for the first phase. And within that bakery, they'll service the residents, they'll service the greater Monona community as well as the entrepreneurs that utilize B Square. We've actually had conversations and have an agreement with Kaz Scaife. If you all aren't familiar with Kaz, she's the owner of Rosie's Bakery and Coffee Bar on Monona Drive. Some of the best coffee I've ever had. I haven't been drinking coffee long, but it is the best coffee I've ever had, so I can say that. So it's these type of strategic partnerships that we've been able to make throughout the community, locally as well as regionally, that gives us confidence that the commercial aspects that we're offering, that we're going to provide to the Monona community, will be successful. In addition, within phase 1 of the general development plan, as previously mentioned, we also aim to help in addressing one of the leading deficiencies pertaining to housing, and that's housing of veterans. In order to cater to this population, 25% of our total unit mix, which is a total of 18 units within that first phase, will be reserved to house veterans. We're going to accomplish this in partnership with Dane County Housing Authority, who's awarded us 8 project-based vouchers. In addition to that, we're going to offer 10 units at a reduced rent to the veteran population. Through in-depth conversations that we've had with Nicole Lillis, who's the program manager for the Veteran Housing Program within the Wisconsin Department of Veteran Affairs, we were able to confirm that there is a great need within Dane County for veteran housing. With that great need also comes challenges with actually transitioning veterans into a permanent housing option. So when I posed the question to Nicole, just asking, well, hey, what are the challenges if she had to boil them down? She boiled them down to 2 aspects. One being affordability, which we're hoping that we can address. Although a relatively small number, the 18 units that we have, we are offering them at reduced rates so that they are accessible to the veteran population. In addition to that, she referenced supportive services being an issue for veterans because they need help to maintain their independence. So services are needed. So what we did there was decided to partner with Lutheran Social Services as part of our development team for the first phase of this general development plan. Lutheran Social Services, to give you a little background, they're a very resourceful organization of about 1,100 employees, 1,800 volunteers within their network. They currently operate in more than 115 communities with the goal of providing catered services to groups and individuals that need them. For Broadway Square specifically, Lutheran Social Services will be assisting the veteran population with obtaining veteran-specific benefits. They'll provide support with continuing education. They'll provide resume preparation and job training skills. They'll also provide access to counseling, whether it be post-traumatic stress disorder or any type of financial awareness that's needed. So these are some of the examples of how we continue to look for opportunities to work with the greater community to make this development better. Pass it back to Kevin.
I'm going to go ahead and conclude. It's our assumption that the combination of all the factors that we mentioned today will unite this development be something that we ought to be proud of, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. We believe that it'll have a tremendous amount of financial impact on the local economy. We think it'll be something that'll be good for the brand of Monona. I believe it has character. It's not something that's traditional, but it's also something that we will look at as something that could differentiate Monona's campus, and community from the rest of the surrounding community. We're excited about it, and we're available for questions, feedback, and further direction about how we may be able to further improve upon this general development plan.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak on this? Gary, did you want to say something, or are you just here for questions? Anyone else wish to speak? If not, we'll close the public hearing section, move on to B, which is the pre-hearing conference on the request. Sonia?
So just in general, we started out with plans that had a singular residential building on one smaller lot. That was not an appropriate land use based on feedback from the Plan Commission. So in response, the applicants pursued a general development plan, which brought us to where we are today. The proposal is following a planned community development procedure, which is implemented in 2 steps. The first is a general development plan, in which you want to provide a basic level of information to determine acceptability. And 2, you would implement that through precise implementation plans for development of the specific sites. I think we're going to go through the categories of the staff report one by one. If
it's okay with folks, on the second page of the packet tonight, there's some major headings: land use, transportation. I thought to tackle this, would it make sense to sort of discuss, take those topics and have discussion on them and then move through. So Sonia recommended that the first one, land use, that we also incorporate common open space, height and area of development, and site design all into land use. And then after that, we'll go to transportation, then economic, then phasing and implementation. So if there's no objections, we'll kick it off with the land use and for discussion, comments, or questions that were generated from the presentation.
So just on land use?
Land use, common open space, height and area of development, site design, those sections that I thought we could talk about first.
So just a general introduction, we're looking at land use, compatibility of the uses within the site and the campus that they're proposing. And we're also looking at land use compatibility with the proposed development and the surrounding neighborhood. So looking at the surrounding neighborhood, it's predominantly highway commercial uses. The future land use plan for the area shows commercial. And the staff report and the Vierbecker letter explain that residential alone is not incompatible with commercial. However, special attention needs to be paid to site design, connections, and access to make it an appropriate place for housing. So that's why it might make sense to talk about land use in conjunction with all those different categories.
Mr. Albert?
Well, I'll start, I guess. First, I have no doubt about the sincerity of the developer. Yeah, I think you've put together a great team, and you've hit all the things you can hit. I said it the last two times we looked at it, and I'll reiterate it tonight. This is not good land use for Monona. It's probably a good project for you. I'm sure it's a good project for Dane County Housing Authority in the greater Madison area. But this is our highway commercial zoning area. We've got Broadway on the north, which is 15 to 20,000 vehicles per day. We've got 51 on the east, which is over 40,000 vehicles per day. We've got the Beltline on the south, which is over 100,000 vehicles per day. And we've got a building that's actually not shown here, but it's a sewage lift station right here. And for those of you that have been around here long, if you remember, we've had lots of issues with our sewage lift station down on Bridge Road. Over the years, lots of complaints, lots of problems. When we finally agreed to put a sewage lift station in, a new one of the biggest reasons was because there's not a smidgen of residential anywhere near, so we wouldn't have those issues again. So it's not a minor deal. They've put really good technology in to try to keep the odors down, but it's still a sewage lift station. If we looked at a map of Monona and all the areas we could put high-density residential, I think Southtown Industrial Park and this corner, Broadway, be the two areas we say it just doesn't work. I think one of the mistakes we probably made as land use was when we allowed Onderdock Oaks years ago. Those of you that remember, it was James Onderdock came in and he wanted to develop that residential, and that was an area that we felt was a little isolated. Now, it's backs up to Edna Taylor Conservancy, and it's a lot closer than where this is, and it's not nearly the intensity of land use or traffic that this has, but it failed. He went bankrupt, and luckily we had a local developer that came in and finished it off and did get it sold, and it is okay. Talk to the people that are there. They don't feel, a lot of them, like they're really part of the Monona community. They feel like they're an outlier, and it's really hard to get in there. To me, this is an outlier, and it's really hard. I think it could be its own community, but it's not Monona. This is not what we are. We're a tight-knit, close community, and this will be its own little enclave, but it will never be part of what we know as Monona. And the other thing we need to look at as planners, we put together our master plans, we put together our land use plans to try to create a balance within our city. And we try to balance residential, multifamily residential, commercial. We need a strong commercial base. That's what keeps our taxes down. Let's be honest about it. Commercial base puts a lot more into our tax base than it ever takes out. A lot more. When you get to residential, it takes a little more out, higher density residential even more. So what we're doing now is we're asking our existing residents and our existing taxpayers to take a little more of a burden so we can put this in there. And it's not that we don't want it, any multifamily or residential, it's just we need to keep our balance, and we're taking, to me, a critical area, this highway commercial that's left right at this nexus of those high volume streets that we really like, and it's taking that now out of the mix for us. So that's a major commercial chunk that's gone. I know we're calling this mixed use, but something less than 10% of the floor space dedicated to commercial and something over 90% dedicated to housing is not a commercial project. It's a housing, it's a residential project with a small commercial component. Love the presentation. I think it would be a great thing to have. I just think there's no version of this that I can see being acceptable as a planner. And I wouldn't want to answer to the people who have to sit here 20 and 30 and 40 years from now in our seats as to what we were thinking when we did this. Excellent team, no doubt about their sincerity, the success they'll have, but at the end of the day, it's ours. It's not theirs. They'll change, we'll change, but Monona will be here, and this will be Monona's issue. 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, it will still be Monona's issue. Not his, not ours, but whoever is sitting here at that point in time. I think those are all really strong reasons why we have to take a really close look at this. We work really hard to try to compromise and blend all the proposals we see and try to make them work. For me, right now, I can't see how to make this type of a change to our land use plan work in this location. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, looking at it, the biggest problem I have with it is the density of residential components and its isolation and almost island effect that it has. I think of Monona and I think of a strong city center, which we're sitting in, and the accessibility for residents to that area. And you drive out there and it's isolated, and there might be better public transportation answers out there, but, I don't know if that's going to address the fact for those residents. Is it going to make them feel part of the community, the accessibility to library, parks in the city center? I think that's an issue. The overall concept, if it was a much more balanced development between residential and commercial, I think I'd have a lot more favorable opinion about it. I love the veteran housing aspect. I think it's a need that should be met at some point, somewhere. I don't know if this is right for it. With that, it achieves at some face value some of the goals set forth by some of the planning documents, which you illustrated in your packet, which was, that's good. Going through Gary and Darren's notes, though, it illustrates kind of line by line some of the shortcomings associated with what sort of impact it's going to have on schools, waters, utilities. I love the B square concept. That was a great presentation. I would agree. I like that idea. I could see that in Monona someplace. I just don't know with that. It's the residential component that I have the biggest problem with.
Thank you, sir. Griff?
I guess I don't share the concern as much as some of the other plan commissioners do about the residential component. It seems to me we've already approved some residential areas south of Broadway that are similarly isolated. And I think that there are some residential areas just a block away from us on the other side of Menards. It also seems to me that I'm not sure that this parcel presents that great a development opportunity for the future. Granted, it's in a high traffic area, but there are some problems with the development of this site for commercial purposes. And I think a mix of residential and commercial might be very appropriate for this particular area. Whether or not there should be more commercial as opposed to the residential, I'm not sure. I also think that the addition of more residential units as part of this complex reduces some of my concern about the isolation. I mean, there are only so many residential units you're going to be in close proximity to. So from the standpoint of the basic concept of this development, I think it could be appropriate for the area.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, Griff. I was wondering if I was going to be going solo here. I understand the idea that it may appear isolated. As was just mentioned, there is a apartment community under construction right now that is just as far from the city center. It's just as far from the public library. It's just as far from all the Monona services. Quite honestly, it's further away from the services on Monona Drive than this property is. So I look at this as being less isolated than the project that's currently under construction. I definitely agree that the commercial component is not what people would typically visualize as a mixed-use property. I completely understand that. And I think maybe that's what gets me a little bit excited about it. The entrepreneurial center and helping individuals develop small businesses, and I don't mean to sound corny here, but needs to be the foundation of this country. And the idea of Monona being part of that in Dane County is very exciting for me. I do have a difficult time understanding how that works. I understand the presentation, I understand all the elements, not having been involved with it. The popularity of its use is something that I'm just not able to wrap my brain around. The concept of it, I think, is fabulous, and for me, very exciting to have that in our community. I haven't been on this commission for a very long time, and certainly, like Commissioner Homburg, cannot speak to the development of Monona over the past 20 years. It seems to me that land has been empty for a very long time. I don't know what kind of commercial requests we've had there over the years, but obviously nothing has evolved. And I think this might be a very interesting use for the property. I like the heights of the building. I think on the highway like that, getting up to 5 stories with the multifamily is a great idea. I think development in Monona needs to go more vertical than it has been over the past few years. When we look at other possibilities for multifamily in Monona, as we all know, we're landlocked, and so I'm just not exactly sure where we would have the opportunity for a project like this in the future. So my initial reaction to it is without a doubt positive. I think there's some very interesting ideas. It sure seems to me, as having some exposure to development, that it's very challenging for the developers to make this work. But my initial reaction is very positive.
Thank you.
So far.
Alder Holmquist.
When I look just at land use issues, I've tried to weigh this out, kind of reasoning it from a few different standpoints, and the one that's kind of continues to come back to me time and time again is leaving the interstate and traveling towards Madison. The first spot where you start to see residential anywhere close to the belt line isn't until you get closer to Verona Road. The development and road work that's going to be done on 51, if all of that goes through, and the change of that ramp is going to be much closer to this site and elevated, from my understanding, is of concern for the site as a whole, but it speaks to the issue of what is it that, how that interplays with land use issues. The balance of commercial and residential, I agree with some of the previous comments of really this is a residential development that happens to have a small use of some commercial within it. When I then look at the surrounding area, as Commissioner Ganser pointed out, that there is some housing a block north of there, but that housing area is a significant sized neighborhood. I know there's some issues with it as well. There's a lot of individuals that live there, don't feel part of the community, and talk about how do I move across the drive to be a part of the community. So I know that is a piece of that. If I take that part off and look at our Broadway there, it's all commercial. I think residential could have a component in here, but I think it would have to be heavier on the commercial side with residential as an addition to that, rather than the flip where we're at. I agree with the comments that the work that has gone into this, I think, is wonderful work. I love components of this. This is speaking to the land use issue, because there are individual components within this that I think are wonderful and should be done and I'd love to see them be done. The way it's presented here, I have an issue with the land use.
As far as site design, common area space, some of the topics in here, scale, parking, access to drive aisles within the site. Comments? Robert?
Well, we probably should have some kind of consensus as to whether or not it's even an appropriate use if we're going to talk details. If it's not an appropriate use, what's the point in going through all the details?
Well, it's not up for action. It's a pre-hearing conference. So our purpose here is to give feedback.
Okay.
And what I heard is there's some mixed feelings, but you know that well, there's some mixed feelings as far as the proportion of residential and commercial. There's some components that people find very exciting, but the applicants requested our feedback on some other topics too, and I don't want to just dwell on that. So, you know, as far as the site itself, issues with access for drive aisles, parking, building design, there was a comment that liked the height. Is there any feedback for the applicant on those types of issues? Mr. Emmer?
Well, as far as the building size, I have no issue with the scale. I think it's great scale. It's great. I mean, I like to use, I mean, the scale of it is all good. I like to get some use out of this land. As far as the parking facilities, it feels, it feels like a lot of asphalt without, I don't know, it feels like I'm going down a lot of dead ends. It feels like, you know, I'm going down a dead end here, I'm coming in a dead end there, I'm coming in a dead end here. This, although it circulates, it's really down a long dead end, so to me, it doesn't feel, I'm talking about if this were to get built, it doesn't feel welcoming for what it is, but, you know, as you know, for me, it would be something different. But as far as the green space, there's a lot of green space here. If I were to allocate green space, if this were to get built and there were major residential component here and here, I'd like to somehow get some more of that green space around the major residential component. I love having some on the periphery, but I think if we had any thought about putting 200 plus units in there, that there needs to be more just green space, active area right around the buildings would be helpful. A lot of this is going to be back slope. As far as I heard, I believe underground parking for this building, was that right? This was in the floodplain, we all remember that. It was just taken out of the floodplain, and there's just enough fill put in here to bring it above the floodplain, so I'd caution if we're going with underground parking to really take a really close look at the water levels and everything there, because this was, like I said, it was floodplain. We just, 2 years ago, got it out of the floodplain mapping. Something, I don't know, I know Darren would remember. So that would key for me. I'd sure be looking at keeping that underground parking dry and what provisions there were for that. Yeah. As far as we're land use, scale development, nature site, transportation, I'm glad to hear if this were to happen that Monona Lift would be interested in servicing it, because that's really, really important. As far as pedestrian connections, I know you spoke to them. I'd like to see more fluid. If this were to happen, I'd like to see more fluid connections where I don't have to, you know, walk from this building, come across over in here, get over here. I mean, there's connections, but to me, it needs to be a little more fluid where for any one of these major buildings to get to the next or to get out to the Broadway or something. I think it's minor. I think if we ever got to that point, it's something you could fix, but I'd like to see it. It seems a little disjointed at first blush to me, is all on pedestrian connections. And certainly the, you know, to have a bike path, or it might be a multi-use path where it's bicycle and walking, but a major path that could connect the whole thing, weave through it, that would be something that would seem to be exciting for a development like this, with some bike facilities, et cetera, off to the side. I mean, that would all be great stuff to see if this were happening.
Rob, any comments?
In regards to the site plan, I think building 1, I think after you made revisions to that, and that looks like what you've done there to make that a more hospitable residential space. I think you've done a really good job with that. The rest of the site, it seems to be a lot of parking, and I think in Beerbecker's notes, there could possibly be opportunity to minimize, or to reduce some of the parking with shared agreements and get approval through commission, which, if that could happen, I think that could help open up green space. But as it stands now, especially looking back at Building 4, I mean, you're tucked back in a corner there, and it's driving through a mall parking lot is what it reminds me of. But maybe that could be addressed. I know this isn't a final site plan by any means, but connecting Building 2 and 3 with maybe a larger open space is a possibility. I know some of those efforts were tried between 1 and 2, and you know, that's not designed out now, and I realize that. Moving forward, you'd have site amenities and different signage, packaging, all those different things, but something to keep in mind to just kind of create a more cohesive community green space.
Mr. Dorsal?
Just in looking at the plan from the top, it does seem to me too that it seems like there's a lot of asphalt. And it just, on a kind of a first impression, it doesn't look like there has been an awful lot of integration between, for having acquired another lot, we have a separate commercial parking lot for Building 1 and a separate commercial parking lot for Building 2. I don't know if there's any way to consolidate that parking area in some way that would make it seem less separate. And perhaps to gain some green space in the process of doing that. I assume that what's labeled as lot, can't read it, sorry, lot 2, and the lot to the west of Building 1 are both primarily intended for commercial, are they? So that's somehow or other, there is that one connection by sidewalk, as you pointed out, but it was, rather than, it seems like the parking lots were designed really following the lot lines, rather than thinking about this as a single overall development that could be integrated in some way. And I think there would be some opportunity to pick up some green space there.
Mr. Ganser?
First, I'd like to confirm with staff what the presenter said about them having met the requirements for both parking and green space for this property. Is that correct, or don't we know that yet?
In the plan submitted by Excel Engineering, they're showing total provided parking spaces of 410 and required parking spaces of 411. So based on the overall site total number of parking stalls that are meeting the minimum requirements. However, I also had a comment in there, concern when you look at phasing. If only phases 1, 2, and 3 are built, the first 3 buildings, and not the building furthest back, number 4, the development would be 70 parking stalls short. So concerns over phasing and when Building 4 would be developed and how parking would be accommodated between.
Okay. And how about green space?
For green space, overall, they showed that they had 30% green space throughout the entire site. I think a couple of the sites, if you took them individually on their own, met the 30%, and there were a couple others that were closer to 18%. I think the orange building, building number 2, was below the 30%. Another concern in the Beerbecker report and in the staff report is just the function of the green space and where it's located, and if there's enough space for residents to recreate, surrounding the buildings with the parking lots, not using the environmental corridor and the green space and the streams and the stormwater facilities as amenities, but rather kind of putting them where they fit. So those were some concerns with the functionality of the green space.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know if the concept about addressing those two commercial parking areas, I really like that idea and allowing for greater green space in front of the two commercials, but maybe that isn't going to be something that's feasible if we're at the minimum in both of those categories. It's unlikely that we can eliminate any parking certainly. But I thought that was a pretty cool idea to bring the two commercial fronts actually closer together and bring those parking lots together, and that would allow more green space on the west side of Building 2, which is the residential front, and the east side of Building 1, which is the residential front, by bringing the commercial parking between Building 1 and Building 2 closer together and bringing those buildings a bit closer together. You know what I'm saying? So, no, that's really it as far as the site is for me.
Thanks. Brian?
Given the comments that others have shared, that's the piece that jumped out, as well as the center parking. I'll leave it at that because I know others have already addressed the other issues.
Sonia, a question on the access point here. Is a traffic study something that would be needed?
I think there are some unanswered questions that could be answered with a traffic study. We don't have the trip generation for the entire project and what impact that would have on the access. We don't know if the intersection needs to be signalized and if that would be possible. We don't have a really good idea of how traffic would be circulating throughout the site with all the different drive aisles.
I think, Kevin, you're only left out is between lots 3 and 2. And there's going to be, B Square, is going to have potentially a lot of users, and I'd be interested in how that's going to impact traffic there, along with the residential. So, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So while we're on site design, I thought it might just be useful to really briefly go down the bullet point list in the Verbecker report, because as we explained, residential is not incompatible with commercial, but in order to make residential appropriate, special attention needs to be paid to the site design, connections, and access. So number 2, the site has limited interconnectivity between different buildings and phases. The parking lot areas are not connected where they could be, and pedestrian connections dead end in parking lots in some areas. Number 3, all of the buildings are surrounded by parking and drive aisles with the exception of the south side of building number 1. While there are some pedestrian connections, they appear to have taken second position to parking and drive aisles. It would be difficult to greatly improve the pedestrian friendliness of the site due to its proximity to the Beltline and the highway. But the site and building footprints could be laid out in a manner that is more pedestrian friendly. Could be emphasized through improved internal site circulation and connection to adjoining areas rather than the current configuration of surrounding all buildings with parking. Number 6, stormwater management areas could be better integrated into the site so that they become features amenities. The creek along the west side could be turned into a site amenity where residential directly overlooks the greenway. In general, residential units should be located away from the Beltline, or some consideration given as far as screening or a buffer between the Beltline at the close part to building number 4. An architectural site design component that relates to residential is the parking at grade with blank building facades at the ground floor level on building number 1. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is building number 4 at grade parking?
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be another building facade where we'd want to pay special attention to activating the pedestrian level to make sure that it's safe and not a hostile environment for residents or pedestrians. And then number 11 was, in general, more information on the residential micro units proposed in building number 4. What specifically about this site in the Madison market lends itself to micro units and more of a highway-oriented suburban type of a development versus a downtown where you might see these type of micro units.
With respect to transportation, Kevin, you had mentioned that you'd had conversations with the city on the Monona lift, but there's nothing that's, as far as what needs your customers would have, and what Monona lift would provide, and when they would provide it, would be useful information to discuss, future meetings. My concern, if Monona lift isn't available or doesn't provide the need, if they needed Madison Metro, they'd have to cross Stoughton Road to get to it. And some of the population in building 1 that you would serve, if they need bus transportation, I wouldn't want them crossing Stoughton Road to get to a bus. So that's an important element to nail down. Any other comments, Mr. Unberg?
I just want to say I agree with most of the Becker recommendations, and a lot of them, for me, they point to the fact that there's just a little bit too much on this site, and I think that's where it's struggling. To have enough stalls, but to have 7 of them down that you need down by building 4 doesn't put the parking stalls in the right place. The parking needs to be where it's needed around the buildings, I think. I think it's just, for the current proposals, there's just a little too much trying to be put in here, and that's where you're struggling on getting the green space and some of the areas integrated, so it doesn't feel like you're in a mall parking lot. To me, I mean, that's what a lot of those comments kind of say. They're keep going back to struggling for too much in a confined space. I would like to comment, I didn't, but I think if you were to put this in, you would probably need to close this and just hook that in instead of having 2 entrances so close together. That would be a traffic conflict, and there'd be no point for it. So if you were to do this, I'd work with the White Horses and just let that go straight through, but then we've got one main driveway here, or get into theirs. I suspect they'd prefer to keep their space and get into yours.
I mean, I don't know if we can, this is appropriate for like responses or anything like that. What's the appropriate,
Sure, I think it's entirely appropriate to respond.
Oh, I'm sorry then. I've been completely mute the whole time. Yeah, that's some of the challenges we have amongst different ownership groups, in ensuring that we're not doing anything that's detrimental to their business. That's why they are seeking to have this particular easement come into play, which does add into the overall ingress-egress for our Lot 4, which is awesome. I think that we can have that conversation with them about closing that off in the event that the entire development went forward.
I understand their concern, but our concern would be a traffic concern on
Yeah,
a road with that type of
Yep.
volume of traffic. Adding another cut that close is just a traffic conflict.
Yeah, I totally get it. Totally get it. So I'll make sure we bring it up with the Whitehorse family to, get their thoughts and suggestions as well, figure out ways we can address that thought. In regards to some of the other items, parking is definitely something that we've been kind of figuring out how can we best address while trying to maintain and hit the minimum requirements. We'll definitely go back to the drawing board on that and get very, very creative as we can to make it, probably to Jonathan's, liking, come up with a design that that may not meet the record or the law on the parking requirements, but it be something that contributes to the overall health of the site.
But with that, I don't know what the demand for B square is going to be. But it sounds like this could be a busy place. I mean, if people are coming in, and you said it was a health club for the mind, and so I imagine they use it the same way. They're going to come in for a couple hours and leave. It's not something they go to some people will come in all day, but a lot of people will come in for a couple hours and leave, so it's going to be high traffic, you're going to need parking. So,
Yeah,
I mean, if the coffee shop's going to succeed, it's going to need a volume of traffic in there for to survive.
And going with the why we picked the the density at the residential level that we did, it does help us to achieve the highest and best use for the site, bringing out the highest tax base and things of that nature as well, and overall flow. And when you talk about economy of scale, when you're talking about construction this level, it definitely has some impacts as well. We'll definitely go back to the drawing board on a couple of these items and figure out ways we can make it more appeasing. And another component that we kind of should probably highlight is the fact that, although this site is heavy residential, we kind of looked at it from the standpoint of this, not just this site, but looked at this corridor and said that how do you balance, the question of how do you balance the mixed use, so much residential here and, so little commercial. The fact that it's surrounded by so much commercial, we kind of look at this as the overall general development plan. Although this is coming in as its own standalone today, it definitely provides balance for this particular area. And as a, we have a lot of different study and information and feedback and so forth related to market studies that suggest that, one, housing, is in high demand in this area. And this, investors are very, very bullish about this community, but very, very particular about what they want to be. Some of the things that kind of like, in typical, I guess normal feedback would be, why right next to a highway? That's ironically the most attractable, amenity that we have when marketing this development to potential residents, because everyone wants to be in close proximity to commute. They want to figure out how am I going to get to my job, or how am I going to get to my friend across town, and having that access point is one of the most attractive amenities that we have here, ironically enough. And also the fact that, I know we speak about the commercial component, the neighborhood being somewhat of a challenge. It's actually makes it most attractive when you're talking about residential apartments. Being so close to healthcare right here, and this is of course a pet-friendly environment as well. Have your veterinarian right there in your same block. We have the closest proximity residential-wise to Pier 37, which is a major shopping center here, than most Monona residents. So the argument about isolation is definitely, I definitely understand it, the challenge of how do you make them all feel like they're part of the community. But to be honest with you, when you talk about those elite services, full-time grocery store, healthcare, and things of that nature, shops and coffee shops and eateries, we are like in prime real estate for those kind of amenities with those amenities. And that's why investors are excited about investing here. That's why investors from across the country who we've been showing this development opportunity to are like jumping up for joy and saying, what, we want to find a way to be there, because the national trends are showing that individuals that live in residential facilities of this nature are seeking to be next to those amenities. And this is probably just the day-to-day living, and they'll probably utilize those facilities on a more frequent basis than they probably will utilize, City Hall where they come pay bills and taxes and things of that nature. Just because that's you got to get bread, you got to get milk, you got to get, go get your coffee, whatever the case may be. So that's what makes it, and I think that's probably the shift in dynamics about how real estate is kind of growing. We got to kind of build for the new economy. The new economy is suggesting that, we're doing the right thing here. This is what the market demands. This is what's going to be the growth in the future in this industry. What makes it a great match. And we're excited about it. We hope you guys can get there as well, and we'll continue to work.
Thank you. Mr. Amber?
I just want to point out what I think Griff and Dale were talking about, and where it feels a little disjointed on this plan is we're coming in with a GDP for the entire property, but we're really coming in with a build-alone piece here and then an add-on piece here, and that's where this area really just doesn't work together and flow. If I'm not trying to speak for you, but it's like, I understand this is a GDP, but it's like, this is designed, this is a standalone piece, that's your intention to build this out, and then sometime in the future this will get built, which is kind of standalone, but yeah, that's what it's all going to look like versus having a project knit right in where you actually have great opportunity to combine parking lots and maybe create a good common space and things like that. Just a suggestion, or consolidate that commercial area, so you have more area for common space and residential area on the other side. But this whole area, there's an awful lot of asphalt and very little to connect these buildings together. I think that's...
We tried to address that too, but by saying, the question of, what happens if phase one, gets done and the other phase is done? That's the question that we got asked. And so we were like, okay, we got to make something that looks well for phase one. If worst case scenario, the city is upset and what it looks like is phase one is only going to go forward, how do we make it look appealing? And so that's why we kind of have some separation a little bit, but also some green space up in there. We've been kind of exploring the idea of how do we give that city that comfort, and knowing that phase two, which is the most dominant on building two, which is the most dominant, building 2 and 3, which are the most dominant on lot 2, how do we give you guys some assurance that that'll get done? Do we do them all together? And then basically say, hey, we're going to acquire this piece of land, we're going to acquire everything up, say north and above. And how does this all work together? And this becomes a GDP. And then that allows us to kind of, in a sense, have more integration between those components. We've been kind of exploring that, but so that's the question. I think if you can ask the commission, what are their thoughts about potentially just having the GDP consist of primary functions or definitive functions on these components, and then we can work together on in the future, on what's the best use for this land. Because I think that's one challenge we all have, is we're trying to build everything out and fit a lot of things on here to maximize all the areas of the land and make sure we're achieving its highest and best use. But these are some areas that are pretty much, and I think it's probably easier challenge for us to kind of tackle, but we'll take some feedback on that if you guys got it.
I would say that it would absolutely help if you could, fine tune those designs and try to create that better connection between those two commercial building fronts in a little more detail. That would be great. I hate to put you through all that work though, if the land use isn't, if we're not, like you said, if we're not on a consensus of land use. I think you make very good points on some of the amenities it does offer to residents with the the access to groceries and shoppings and those everyday sorts of things. But yeah, I don't know if it's appropriate to ask you to go through and do site design for 3 building footprints and to really kind of give us that picturesque living environment. I don't know if it is or not, or if, because I know it's a lot of work.
Yeah, Sonia?
Yeah, I think some of the major shortcomings that we've been talking about are directly related to the residential land use and the lack of connectivity between the buildings, massive asphalt areas and drive aisles that people have to walk across, lack of green space and recreating space for residents. So I think it's absolutely appropriate to look at the site design changes instead of disjointed 2 separate sites, and figure out how building 1 and 2, the orange and yellow, can relate better to one another, and open it to the Plan Commission on their thoughts on removing building number 4 or not.
I don't think we can remove building number 4. This is a GDP, and if we do that, it's a landlocked parcel. And the only way that parcel has access and continuity with the rest of it and with Broadway is through part of this GDP and joint access easement, so it would be virtually impossible. Be like Fritz, when he did his property, he did a GDP he created a lot down there with a potential use, but still had to be addressed in the GDP. It's not addressed in the GDP, we've created a landlocked parcel.
For those who don't know, who's Fritz?
Oh, it's Broadway and the clinic and, sorry, it's right here, it's this parcel.
Okay.
No, yes, it's the treatment plant. So there's still another parcel back here as part of the GDP, that's why this road's here it was presented as an office building. It hasn't been built, it's a future phase of the GDP, but we can't chop off a piece of land that's part of this and connected and say we don't know what we're going to do with it in the future. We have to look at accessibility, what the potential footprint would be, what potential parking, all that type of thing. That doesn't mean it has to be part of this phase, but it has to be addressed in the GDP.
And that's what we're kind of leaning towards, potentially trying to present and want to get you guys' feedback, because we would like to get started on these 2 buildings, for instance, in the summer months. this year, 2015. But this is something that would, if it's an apartment building, would have to be based off of demand and lease up of these two opportunities here. And so we wouldn't begin construction until these are fully stabilized assets. And so that would be something that can start construction in, say, 2018. If it was going to be an agreed upon residential component on this particular piece of the development plan. Our thoughts are, we've been researching with some hotel providers, and we have another third-party developer who's taking a lot of lead on that. There is some significant interest in a hotel component. We went back and forth and figuring out exactly, do we present a hotel to the planning commission? Because there's some interest there. And would we stick with more of a residential campus if we're already going so much residential in the first place? And then there's another component similar to what Fritz is doing here with the proposing as just a commercial use. So we can say, hey, we have for sure know what we can do here. This is still going to be a little bit of outlier based off of demand. If the commission has some challenges with adding more residential, we will be comfortable working and saying, hey, we're going to develop these two, make sure they have necessary ingress and egress to this site so it doesn't landlock from an access standpoint, and then say, whatever's going to go here must be commercial. So rather it be another a retail opportunity, rather it be an hotel, or maybe it's an office space, but that'll be something that'll be determined in the future why these two developments right here and this development right here moves forward.
Well, I'm just going to state the obvious. I would 10 times rather have a hotel than another apartment. Every municipality around wants to attract hotels. They're a great boon for the community. They bring people in and out. It keeps the traffic coming and going from there. They generate room tax. They do a lot of great things for the community, but hotels are really, really, really tough to get.
Yeah.
It's really hard to land a hotel.
And we're not a hotel
So I mean
developer.
to say, well, we'll do a hotel, that's nice, but it's really, really difficult to land a hotel unless you have the perfect spot for it.
Yeah, we're not a hotel developer, but we have development team partners who specialize. We have many hotels in their portfolio that have been working diligently with a few brands on this particular component of the deal. One challenge that presents itself is, nothing zoned right now. And so all conversations go to a certain level of saying, that would be feasible. We'll give you some feedback on this, but, right now, how far do we send our team with a site that you guys don't have zoned yet for anything? And that's all components of the deal.
For me, a hotel is a huge game changer, and it really skews it back towards a major, major commercial component, having a hotel. But just to be able to say a hotel, I mean, it's like bring a hotel. If you could bring a hotel, that would be big.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Any other comments for the applicant?
In dealing with the last parcel there with building number 4, I think it makes sense to look at some parameters too on the intensity of the building so that as you're moving forward, you have a basic understanding of what could be developed there. What is the building footprint that it can accommodate? How much green space do you need for the site based on your potential use? How much density do you need to achieve a certain level of financing or whatever else it is? Those basic parameters can be approved within the general development plan, and then if you stray from those parameters, that would be considered outside of what was approved.
That makes sense. Okay.
Anything else?
Kevin, I just want to ask the question, I just want to be clear on this. Are you saying that you'd have some hotel developers interested if you knew that one could be developed there?
Yeah, that's one part of the challenge is, even with, raising the equity for this deal, and, this deal, is sealed and delivered, I guess you would say, as far as the commitment letters from the finance companies. The equity is already raised, and we've begun the pursuit of, we have financing in place for that. We have to raise some equity for that, which is not a huge challenge, but before you can really lock that equity in, and say, you got your equity agreement, it needs to be zoned because, people don't want to go too far with, or get some kind of clarity. And we've been very upfront that, there's some interest, but there's a lot of, there's a decent amount of heartburn the city has right now, and then we're trying to work through that process of getting it approved, I guess you would say.
Did you say heartburn? Sweet.
I'm trying to find the most diplomatic way to say that. But yeah, so that's where we're at right now. But there's ton of excitement about it. But people are looking at us like, guys, we really like the idea, but how real is it from the city side? And so that's why we work diligently with Sonia and try to get before you guys today, before we can. So that's what the idea was, kind of bounce some ideas off you guys today, and we're not giving up. So.
Thank you. Anything else?
No.
We could address the economic information that was included in the Bureau report.
Comments, Gary? Any summary on that, or?
I didn't see anything from the financial side. I didn't see any.
If you need up here, Aaron.
Can I sit down? You sit down?
You can, or you can stand, whatever you want to do.
You're the tall guy, you have mine.
Yeah, so I didn't see very many red flags on the financial, for the financial aspect. As far as the economics of the TIF goes, there's enough value being created here to cover the TIF request that, although they haven't formally applied for TIF, they have an informal, they gave the city a heads up as far as an expected TIF request. And so the numbers work, the cash flow works from that perspective. The one thing that was a little bit of a red flag for me is the construction costs seem to be low. And so that raises the question of the materials and the finish of the construction. But beyond that, I didn't see any red flags or anything of significance.
Thank you. Questions? Comments, Mr. Roberts?
Well, it's just, be frank and open about it. Is we're coming through with the GDP to do the whole thing, and I'm sure the city's concern is are you doing all this just to get approval for lot 1, build lot 1, and walk away, right?
Mm-hmm. You want a frank answer?
Yeah.
And that's not what we're trying to do.
Yeah. That's the concern. Is somebody come and say, I'm going to do all this, and then get that one piece they want built and walk away and leave the rest of it. That's a concern.
And that's what, and to be honest with you, Mr. Homburg, we understand that concern. I think I would be concerned if I was in your seat too. It's a fair concern. That's why we raise the level of intensity about what we're planning to do, and even work with the Whitehorse family. These two developments will happen in close proximity to each other or at the same time, and that'll bring that campus that we're talking about here. And so, if we had approval to get that going, we would be full steam ahead, ready, set, go on a lot of this stuff. This would not be something that we would not be able to get done. And I appreciate your candidness. We would move forward. And I know there are certain things in place that we can do to allow you guys to get that comfort. Nobody likes to waste money. We're speaking with Sonia about this. I believe there's opportunities for fines. If, for instance, we started this development and within an X amount of time, 6 months, we didn't begin construction on this one, there's fines that can be in place. And we're willing to put dollars on the line in that regard. We're willing to even work with the Whitehorse family. I shouldn't say this beyond, this is just us privately,
We're
right?
on TV, right?
But, we're working on an agreement with them that will ensure that same kind of concern too, because one thing that the public probably doesn't know is there's definitely different family members in the Whitehorse family that own these pieces of land, and they love each other. But this is a business decision, and they're not, owners of Lot 2 are not in particular high praise about having their land zoned for a GDP, which would again put them in position of having to be limited by what they can build there if we only build here. And they're like, what does that do for us? We go in, we support you, you go out and do what you need to do here, you propose what you're going to do here, you don't do it, and then we're stuck with it for the next 15, 20 years because your idea didn't work. So they're not in agreement either about anything that's going to move forward without these two developments moving forward with some kind of certainty together. We would not be able to submit a GDP application without all families being on board. You can rest assured that they have the same interest in that regard. So that's what we are, and they are working with their broker, who's a prominent broker in the area. This is their whole building design right here. He has strong interest with 3 tenants that are looking to occupy this building, and they want to take the lead on it. We wanted to take the lead on it, and they understand the attractiveness of that piece of land. They want to take the lead on that. We're totally fine with that. We'll take the lead on these two. Collectively together, this is something that's hardcore that we really can move forward on with some high level of certainty.
So, something to, take away from this. If you've got a retail commercial component within buildings 1 and 2, yeah. How does the public know about them? Where would your signage be? I mean, not tonight, but to come back. I'd like to know how does the public know they're there and how to get to them? And if it's a hotel in building 4, you obviously have signage across that would be very visible from the highway. But what about those commercial components that are in the center here?
Can I provide clarity on that? Because that's one of the challenges we did have. We're trying to position it before the commercial retailers is the lack of visibility, which led us to open our market up a little bit and present to you guys B Square.
But I mean, coming down, if I'm coming down Broadway, I'm thinking more signage now. How does the public know that this is
The B Square is here.
Yeah, and I don't think, to be honest with you,
we don't have to fine tune that tonight.
Yeah.
But I'm just a concern. Mr. Arman?
Again, back to that, not guarantee, but knowing everything's going to happen, the money that they're requesting, that's CDA's business, that's none of ours, but CDA could tie it into the whole project going ahead, and some penalties and that money or doesn't get spent if something doesn't happen, and the city through CDA would have some guarantees that the project will happen or they won't participate in the financing or something too. I'm just saying, if we knew something like that was in place with CDA, that would give Plan Commission some assurance that, yeah, this thing's tied together, it's happening, or there's, something really severe happening. If it doesn't.
Can I ask a question? Being that this is a heavy residential opportunity, from your position, Mr. Homburg, would it lean you more towards being accepting of, just one residential building doesn't make a lot of sense. There was 2 residential buildings with the level of commercial that we have here with some flexibility and everything was integrated. Would that lean you further towards being more accepting if you had more of a comfort level that collectively those will move forward together?
I think right now we're talking about how the project could work if it happens, but it's a bigger issue, the land use.
Yeah.
The example you gave that hotel, that helps the entire commercial district. It brings people into the other restaurants in here, it brings people to eat, it brings people to those businesses, it brings people all over, and all of a sudden something like that, then that explodes the commercial potential of this project, for me. For me, not for you asked me specifically, but what we're talking about now, a lot of these details, as the chair mentioned, it's like you wanted feedback tonight. So if this project were to go ahead, what would we like to see? And that's some of the things I think we're talking about in between the 2 buildings for me. What happens there, that could have a big effect on me.
Well,
okay. Yeah.
Any other comment? Otherwise, we've got items to get on the agenda. All right. We'll close the public hearing. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for coming. Thank you, team.
Thanks so much.
We'll move on to 6A, new business, public hearing on request by Robin Farrell, owner, for approval of zoning permit for a marina with 12 boat slips and revisions to the outdoor courtyard and landscaping plan originally approved July 8th of 13 for approval of an outdoor mechanical screening enclosure at 320 West Broadway.
Well, hi, I didn't see you guys in like about 2 weeks. You're fine. I am back to present an alternative courtyard design, which in the process of doing our alternative courtyard design, we realized that the conduit electrical for our ground side was in a different location. So you'll see a different location for the ground sign on the Broadway corridor, as well as the design for the boat docks that tie into the boardwalk portion of the plan. And I did bring along all skid marks all that through kind of what's done.
Thank you. Good to be back. I'm on a paper actually, thank you very much. I was brought into this project to review and revise the interior courtyard plan. I don't have a copy of the plan with me here, but I know that you do. It's a V-shaped courtyard. I familiarized myself with the landscape plan, which I did not prepare, but I'm very comfortable with it. What I try to do is use the same plant palette, the same type of textures and such. What I did do is I made a few changes to the plan, which I hope will help improve it by putting some native plants and kind of change the screening. I think what you see is that the size of the patio has been reconfigured, made a little bit smaller. What I tried, and also the sidewalk near the mechanical area has been changed, and I modified the plant placement and selection over there somewhat. I changed the one significant thing for me is I changed the quaking aspen to calorie pear. The quaking aspen will grow very quickly, mature, die, and then fall. And I've switched those to the calorie pear, which have a very nice habit, outstanding spring blooms, and a beautiful fall color. They're long-lived, and they have a beautiful form in a courtyard setting. I maintain the openness with the view down to the water. I changed the screening of the patios off on the tenants, which would be on the left side as you're looking out. I put continuous hedge of sea green junipers. They'll get 3 to 4 feet tall rather than anything taller, which will completely block them out and block out the sun and make it a kind of an inhospitable area. I think that will suit it well. On the other side, I maintain the landscape theme along the foundation, which is primary perennials, but then significantly what I did by the mechanicals is for the view facing from the courtyard areas, I put Holmstrup arbovita, which will get 8 to 10 feet tall. They'll provide a nice solid screen there. There's some sea green junipers along the edge, and then on the front, the face, which will be at an angle in the courtyard, I placed some relocated viburnum in addition to some grasses, some blue stem, and some other plants that will get 4 to 5 feet tall. So there will be an effective screen there, and as you're looking out with the combination of the trees and the plants there, it'll provide a screen, but your vision is going to be drawn out to the water, so it's going to be a psychological view looking out. So I think it's going to be pleasant. One change that I did from the original is rather than have all the native grass come right up to the patio, there was a significant enough change that I figured put sod, maintain turf out to where the building ends so that there will be the feeling of the garden versus the natural, which I think will be an appropriate view. For the use there, I think it will be pleasing. It really doesn't detract from the views. I think it enhances the livability of that space. And then in terms of the point count, there's a net gain, I think, of 15 or 16 the sea green junipers, and about 20 of the grasses. Other than that, there's no net loss. There's a net gain in plants. So that's what I tried to do. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. on this matter? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, move on to 6B, consideration of action. So, I've gone too far. Sonia?
So there are 3 items that are on here for request of approval. 1 is the 12-foot boat marina. 2 is the revised landscaping plan with a reduction in the hardscape and landscaping changes. And 3 is the mechanical storage area. I was concerned at first with the material of the screening for the outdoor storage area, wanting to make sure that it blends in with the high-quality building architecture that's being put up. But the landscape screening around will be important too, to make sure it blends in and is screened.
Commission members, any comments, questions? Robert?
I'm still not clear on the mechanical screening. So can you walk us through how tall are your mechanicals that you're putting in there? These are the ones that are going to go all the way through the roof?
No, so most of our mechanicals are on the roof.
Yeah.
The only thing that's going out on this patio are what's serving the commercial space.
The restaurant?
Yeah, and it's predominantly the restaurant.
And what is it? How tall is it?
It's shorter than me, but so we're going to go with the 6-foot fence.
And you're proposing to go with, was it the aluminum fence?
It's a composite material and a tan composite. The tan composite actually matches the windows on the building, but not doing a fully, what I didn't want to get is I didn't want to get, looked like we tried to add another building onto the building. So really plastic composite screening material that has a lattice, has a white, almost a white picket fence look to it, but it is actually in a composite plastic
Typically,
material.
that's what we ask for, is adding a building onto the building. You've
Well-
got that nice stone foundation there, and typically you bring that stone foundation right around, and that would be all the screening material right onto the building. So this is very different than what we normally do.
What will the restaurant equipment be, and is it their exhaust fans, is it refrigerator?
We've actually relocated the exhaust fan instead of coming out to the courtyard, and we're adding on an exhaust. The exhaust duct is going up along in the building all the way up to the roof. So the only thing they have outside is the condensers for their air conditioning, but then there's a compressor unit for their refrigeration equipment that goes out as well.
This is a big screening area.
It is a big, it is. There's a lot of rest.
So it's mostly for refrigeration for the restaurant?
Yeah, refrigeration and the heating and cooling load for a restaurant of this size necessitates a much larger air conditioning unit than a traditional commercial space will.
So if the fence is 6 foot high, how high is the landscaping that's going to be around it?
On the end, as you look out from the patio, they're probably going to be, that will get 8 to 10 feet tall. And on the side, the viburnum in the center will get 4 to 5 feet, 6 feet tall, bushy, and then there will be grasses which will get up 4 to 5 feet tall and be very colorful. So it will not be an impenetrable, actually parts of it will be impenetrable, but looking at it from the angle, there will be a few gaps where you could potentially see something above 4 feet, 5 feet.
And Mr. Humber, we could get by with a 5-foot fence. I mean, it covers the equipment at 5 foot. We thought you would want a higher screen.
Well, it's nice to keep your eyes open.
Right.
When it's
That's
right
kind
at
of the
industrial
intent.
level.
Right.
My only thing is, a quick synopsis, I like the marina, it's great, I have no problem with the Lee landscape ground sign, I think the landscaping looks good. I'm concerned about using that material instead of the stone that's right there in the foundation, just wrapping that stone around there. I think for a substantial building and a really neat area, I know you're trying to make this a really fun courtyard. I remember when you presented before with all this massive concrete, and I was like, whoa, that's going to be big, you're having your presentation space and everything. Yeah, and you're taking it down with still a pretty good area. There's an area for people to go, but it's one of your key areas and your key views, and to me, to just put up that plastic or aluminum or fencing versus extending the building foundation is inappropriate for everything else that's around.
And that's one of the reasons we did change the walkway, so the walkway actually walks away from and more into the courtyard. It has moved off of the building.
Yeah, it's so you're walking these landscape architects in a 1-inch equals 16. Where did they get that?
That's an architect scale.
So it's maybe 8 feet away is all. It's not far. I mean, you're walking right by it. And I don't have an issue putting it up there, and we all questioned before that you were going to occupy without having to do this, because we've run into restaurant issues before. So it needs a lot of stuff, but you were pretty confident. So I don't have an issue with coming back and doing this, but I'd like to see it really nice. I'd like to see it really jump out in there instead of, I just have concerns about the material you're proposing to put around it.
Other commissioners, any feedback? John?
Question. So, I wasn't on the commission for development or anything, but is the main view going to be from the courtyard area towards them?
No, well, and one of the things is that the only units that actually look even partially that way are the ones that you're seeing that we're now screening. And the way that angles, the water comes along, the water view, if you're looking along here, the water view for these units is actually along here. So most of the people aren't looking, because of the way that the water moves, most of the people are not looking into the building for any of their views, which is one of the reasons that unusual shape developed for the building in the first place.
Okay. I don't see a problem with the landscape and what you've chosen and everything. Some of the spacing on the arborvitae, maybe, I'm sure it would be field adjusted, but it shows it right up next to the sidewalk, and that's gonna.
It'll be field fit.
Yeah.
But it was meant to be rather than just placed.
Yeah, I think you're not gonna see, for a lot of this viewing corridor, you're not gonna see that at all, period, because those arborvitae will be a wall. And then just a little thing on the other opposite side of the arborvitae, it just seems like it kind of spot was just missed, like landscaping followed all the way around and then have it all the way around the foundation except for this corridor. And I don't know how much traffic or visibility there is from there. There's certainly some from the water, but
It was my understanding that that's just a surface hallway down there, so that being out in there is going to be very minimal, so I was.
Yeah, that's actually.
Suggested not to spend much after that.
That's where the kitchen is for the restaurant, is out that side as well, so.
It's a sidewalk walking back up. If you go one way, you should go back the other, right?
True, yeah, absolutely.
Anything else, Ron? Griff, any comments?
I have no problem with the change to the boat slips and the revision to the landscape plan. I share Mr. Homburg's concern that the mechanical enclosure be substantial and that it be consistent with what we've done in the past.
Mr. Gansey?
No comments.
Alder Holmquist?
That was my first thing when I was flipping through the packet. I thought this was actually something as maybe a gate to the marina area. I was like, oh, that makes sense, right by the water. So it kind of struck me as the material selection is with that. Given the landscaping changes, I assume the area that was being pointed out there was kind of the corner that I'm pointing at.
Right, yeah.
Not
very
sure
good.
where I'm oriented here. That given the density of the landscaping materials around the other side, I can understand how a different material could be acceptable given that density, but then I would want to see something change on this other side because of the pedestrian flow both ways. If the material selection was more complementary to what's already on the building, I could see some of the landscaping being scaled back to allow that to be there. So to me, if it's a different material selection to increase the landscaping density on that corner, if it was the reverse way, back some. All the other pieces are great.
Thanks.
So is there, the applicants requested action on this item tonight? I'm hearing is that two things. One is to extend the foundation around and put a smaller or shorter fence on top of it, and then the other would be to densify the landscaping around the entire perimeter of the new area.
Particularly around that one corner, I think.
Right. Was there a motion on any of the list?
Move approval of conditions 1 through 4 as recommended by staff, condition 5 of the revised landscape plan with the adjustments we talked about tonight and approved by staff. Condition 6 is recommended by staff, and condition 7 is mechanical enclosure materials should better match the building foundation. Final approval by staff.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there further discussion? John?
Well, the way the motion is it would be a little more substantial material on your screening enclosure. There's some dissension among the commission. I just want to make sure. I did it that way because I kind of heard that we should do what we do with every other project and get that your building foundation material to match on there. And we do if you look at all our new projects, especially something this big. I just think in the future it would feel cheap. You've got a really nice building there, and to have that stuff, and you do see it. I mean, it's a nice landscape plan. It takes your eye away, but it's not meant to totally hide it. And I think it would add to it, so that's why I proposed it that way, because I felt the consensus was there, but I'm not certain. I just want to make that clear.
Is there further discussion, comments on that? Seeing none, we had a second, right? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All righty. Thank you so much. Moving on to Michael. He's salivating for a shake.
So I am the owner of 2 restaurants in Madison. Lombardino's restaurant, which I own with one of my business partners, Patrick. We have been there about 15 years. And then we own Tipsy Cow, which is downtown on the Capitol Square, King and Main Street. We are proposing to basically buy the building that housed the old Salad Creations and have the restaurant portion be an extension of Tipsy Cow, which we have. And then lease out the lower portion after we do some things on the inside. And then, of course, they have the apartment upstairs. We'd be looking to be open 7 days a week at that site. The building would be Patrick and myself and my dad that would own it. And then Patrick and I and Sue Curtin would be owning the restaurant portion for the business. Mostly, I know that when we have kind of talked, we are looking at parking as being an issue for that site a little bit. So I kind of did a little research, and that's part of what the pictures are. At different times, what we propose that we would probably be the busiest. So the pictures that are in the dark are taken on a Friday night at 8 o'clock. And the pictures that are in the light are taken on this past Saturday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So the main thing that we would say with the parking on our side of it, we're not too incredibly scared about any being, issues that we would have. Lombardino's has 6 spots that services our restaurant, and obviously downtown we just have whatever, supply from the outer. So we're kind of excited that we would actually have 20 spots for the restaurant. Obviously, some of that would have to be allocated to the lower portion, but we're thinking that's going to be more of an office use so that we would have the full potential for that parking, which is when we have the most customers. As far as the rest of it goes, the site has been a restaurant, so we never had any real fear of running a restaurant where a restaurant has always been. One of them was there for a really long time, so it wasn't I think Sally Creations was something that he did a great job of redoing the building. We don't really have a lot of plans to change the building in and of itself. The first picture there on the front, the only thing that we would be changing would be the colors to kind of differentiate from what it was to what it is today. But we would not have too many other changes as far as the exterior of the building goes. The landscaping seems fine, we just have to kind of look at that when things come in full bloom. At Lombardino's, we have a large garden area that's outside. We would be working with our gardeners from there that would be maintaining that space as well, which the neighborhood in the Lombardino's area really loves. So, the second picture, Tony and I had talked about some bike parking, which one of our really good customers is Saris, and they make bike racks, and so they're coming out and looking at the space in the back there to see what, they have a lot of different bike parking options. It's not all just the big racks, they have a bunch of different things, so she's gonna come and look and see what we can kind of do in that back area that would pretty much be underutilized minus just the deliveries that have to come in. As far as parking goes, there's only spots about half of the way up, because otherwise you'd be locked in there. So that is that, and then otherwise, interior changes. The only interior changes that we are proposing, we would have to install a kitchen hood into the existing space because there isn't one. That was removed when they switched ownership. And in the lower commercial space, we would need to remove the shower room to make it a little bit more office space friendly. And I think that is it. As far as any other questions you have?
Okay, well, if you want to hold tight, we'll close the anybody else want to speak on this? All right. We'll close the public hearing, move on to the pre-hearing conference.
Zoning permit's required because it's been closed vacant for over 6 months, and also because it's a more intensive use than the previous use because we're increasing the seating in this proposal. So the biggest issue to be discussed is parking with a 99-seat capacity and 20 parking stalls. Based on the requirements in the code, they would be 13 stalls short. They were considering or exploring shared parking agreements with other commercial buildings, so if you have any updates on that, that would be great too.
I don't currently.
Okay.
We're working on it, but the neighboring property, they have been reluctant to, we haven't gotten to a point where we're comfortable, basically.
I think some small landscaping improvements could be made on other applications. The Plan Commission has required planters to be included around the facade of a building. And this building received a facade improvement grant for the exterior changes, so I wanted to make sure that exterior changes are okay with the Plan Commission, and if more information is needed on the color changes.
Thank you. Where would the vent hood be located? Rooftop, side?
So it would be on the rooftop. So it comes out of the building on the side, which would be the south side,
right.
And then it goes up, and then it goes in.
South
so
side.
it would go
West side.
west, yeah.
So
it goes up and then over to get away from the residential windows because it has to have 10 feet of clearance.
Okay, so it exit outside and then goes up.
Right. So it'll be, yeah, it'll have a vent that'll go up, and all the mechanicals around the roof.
Yep. Other comments from the commission? Mr. Hunter?
Well, number one, I think it'd be a great spot there. I think Rosario's did well there for a long, long time. I think it's not our job to judge the survivability of the business. I think we all worried about Sally Creations making it there. It's tough for them to bring them in. I think a unique business like yours would probably do quite well there, so I'd love to see you there. I think you're right, they did a lot of good building improvements. The chair's question is valid just because we've had complaints in the past with exhaust fans towards residential. So we're going to want to know where it is, and that's going up and not to the back because of the noise requirements. You'll get nicked for that later anyway.
Sure.
Now, I know Lombardino's works well for you. Laugh, laugh, that's a walkable area. I mean, that's downtown. There's no comparison to this area. And parking, you've already identified it, is going to be your number one issue.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you could somehow get access or a joint agreement with a neighbor, that would help you a lot. We're here because we want you to be successful. We don't want you to put yourself in a corner you can't get out of. That was Rosario's number one problem, always was, and that's why they don't want to talk to you, is because he always overflowed onto them, and the patrons went there and parked, and they just did it, and so there's parking wars. And so you're jumping into that. But parking will be your number one concern, be our number one concern. As far as colors, we'd want to see the colors, you know, what you're proposing.
Yeah.
It would, hopefully it won't be a circus wagon or something like that.
That's right, keep it.
And I think landscaping, Sonia's comment on landscaping is valid. Basically, your property is all building and pavement. Now, to help the businesses, we allow the parking that we don't use the right of way. That's where a lot of this parking comes from. There's some areas, there's some nice hedges and things that were done with the Monona Drive reconstruction, but the site needs something. I don't know what. Talk to your gardener. I don't know. And then on the last afternoon, we even talked about maybe getting a tree. There's a massive area here. It's in the right of way, so we can put one there. But there's not a tree on the site. We've got the terrace trees and not another tree on the site. I don't know what it is. You know.
Sure.
But I think we'd love to see you come back to say, hey, we think we can just brighten it up, even as annuals, some flowers and planters or something, just something to soften the site up a little bit and make it more friendly. But overall, I think it'd be a great business for Monona. I'm excited to see you come.
Excellent.
Rob, any comments, or anybody else?
Remember on the rooftop mechanicals, you want to see that as well, right? Yeah. Make sure that meets design requirements. Other than that, parking would be the only thing. Mr. Convert said everything said about that, but I'm excited. I was excited to see it in the packet this week, and we'll hope this works out for you.
I agree. I think it would be a good addition. I think that the parking is the problem. Whatever you can do to mitigate that would be helpful. And that some suggestions in terms of planters would be welcome.
Mr. Gansey?
I believe it's been covered.
Alder Holmquist?
I was excited to see it.
I agree, parking's the issue, but great, it's very exciting. I hope you can pull it together. It'd be a wonderful addition. Thank you for considering this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Move on to 6E, review approval of design elements for community wayfinding package. Sonia.
So the sample has been up on Monona Drive for a few weeks, and what we're looking for tonight is your review and approval of the specific design elements, including the font type, size, overall size of the sign, whether it's legible, and the general branding elements.
Did you want to read or summarize? Sharon sent in an email.
I haven't read it yet, so I'll do my best to summarize, but she's talking about the font type. Originally, she had requested Helvetica or Arial, which is shown on your plan set as one of the options. The sample that's up on Monona Drive is Bookman Old Style Bold. And the reasoning for going with Bookman Old Style Bold was when the letters are condensed, the serifs on each individual letter maintains the readability of those individual letters, whereas with Helvetica, as you condense the letters, they sort of blend together more. So that was the reasoning for going with Bookman, and Sharon's comments are that Helvetica or Arial are universal fonts used by professionals on signage across the world because of its clean, crisp, and more contemporary shape and superior legibility at a distance. This is an especially important issue on roadway signage where moving traffic must view and discern several lines while moving and traveling past in a few seconds. I personally find the Bookman style too traditional, especially when teamed with the Monona type style. I would like us to look more progressive and want something to complement and contrast the already serif font that forms Monona. The sign heading Monona should provide contrast to the body of the sign. That contrast should include size, weight, and style. The Bookman type style is too much like the Monona lettering, yet not as clean. If you actually quickly glance at the signage details Dale has prepared, out of the corner of your eye, you will see the Bookman lettering begin to all run together, while the Helvetica remains much more discernible. While the uppercase letters are again appropriate for the heading Monona, the mixing of upper and lowercase lettering should be used. This point has been continually tested and proven to be significantly more legible. There are several reasons for this, including the fact that we have been trained from childhood on to read in upper and lowercase. This point alone makes it easier to read as we quickly glance at a directional sign with a list of as many 6 lines as we drive past. Note the example of the Middleton sign, which appears to be a version of Helvetica or similar, although bold and condensed. Perhaps more importantly is the fact that the human eye has a difficult time recognizing words in all caps because the shape around each word is a rectangle, while the upper-lower combination varies in shape and catches our eye. We recognize words based largely on their shape, and when the shape of all words is the same, it makes it much more difficult to read them. So, my recommendations are the lettering should be in Helvetica or Arial, which is its sister. The Helvetica should not need to be condensed as shown, as it makes the letters tall and thin. Bold could be considered. The lettering, except for the Monona heading, should be all upper and lowercase. I do not indent Nature Center, as it is part of Aldo Leopold and not a subcategory. The lines of words could be a bit closer to the arrows so they are more easily associated with one another. Size. The signs have gotten much larger than I had anticipated, at 4 feet wide by 5 and 8 inches high. This is taller than we allow our ground signs in the city to be. This size also places the lettering higher up on the light poles than they should be, and they should be relating to the driver. The signs as detailed would actually make better ground signs to place in the medians. I feel the 4-inch high lettering can be reduced in height and would still be readable with the upper lowercase combination, and the sign size could come down a bit. Should the seagull still be on the signs? Question. I believe they were removed from the Monona entry signs, however, I may be wrong. There was a strong presence of the community to not continue with the seagull when the entry signs were discussed. If it remains, I do not think we need to have the wingspan outside the edge of the sign.
Is that all?
So, Mr. Ganser, I turn to you for expertise here. The comments on the upper and lower case and the font size, what do you think?
Well, I wish Sharon was here because it puts me in an uncomfortable spot, her not being here. I don't believe there was anything in that letter that I agreed with. The use of help, there's a reference to trying to look more progressive and suggesting that Helvetica or Arial brings us towards that. That's a font developed in the 40s that, and Chris, with all due respect, every engineer and architect, that's the only font they have
Is that
on
why
the
it's so
computer.
readable? That's why I can read it so easily, right?
So, Helvetica or Arial being progressive is, I couldn't possibly disagree with more. In reference to the size of the signs, it'd be great if they could be smaller. I was pleasantly surprised when that mock-up went out because I was concerned these were going to be too small. All the examples that I have illustrated from Middleton, which is very consistent in size, the sign down on Broadway, the Sun Prairie signs, what was the other community I was in? Sun Prairie and Wanakee. Those street signs are all consistent, relatively consistent with what is being proposed here. However, all of those signs are on 2-lane roads with 25-mile-an-hour speed limits. there's not an example out there that's on a 4-lane road with a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. These signs in no way are too small, in my opinion.
Too small or too big?
They're not, yeah, they're not too big, I'm sorry, excuse me, at all. And I was concerned that they weren't going to be big enough, but I think that mock-up that went out made me more comfortable with the size.
What about the upper and lower case?
The upper and lower case lettering, the biggest problem I have, and this is not to say that it can't be read, but you end up with all kinds of spatial concerns when you get to letters dropping below the baseline. And if you look at the Middleton sign, you can start to see the Y in city, the Y in library, the G in parking. And that's not something I'm comfortable with. I mean, personally, I think aesthetically that's a problem. It starts to distort space, and I don't agree with that. I mean, my preference is when I have a concern similar to what Sharon is mentioning, I will take, for example, in the word city center, I will take the C, the two C's, the beginning of the word, and enlarge the first letter, but I will still maintain all caps throughout it. I think the visibility is greater, it's cleaner, and it's kind of a guaranteed consistency. You know what I mean by that? Like, so the C would be larger, and the C would be larger. In high school, the H and the S would be larger, but they'd still all be caps. Well, what do you people think?
Remember, I feel like a child whose parents are getting divorced. These are our two greatest sign experts. And I respect both of them so much. I don't know. I'm going to have to go to therapy. I do think that it's easier with the first letter a little bigger, whether it's caps and lowercase or bigger and smaller. But I think Middleton sign's easier to read. I think Wanakee sign's easier to read. I agree with that fact. For me, it's easier. I don't have an issue with the size. I thought you two were the subcommittee. I thought you'd have this all worked out.
That was just for location.
Maybe we have to send them back, just like a judge can send a jury back.
Now, Griff?
Well, I don't.
You all feel like you're being put on the spot too, which is certainly not necessary in my case. It is no issue for me to disagree with me.
I mean, I think any of these would be acceptable, frankly. And I don't have a strong preference. I see the point that Sharon is making. But
which point?
Well, yeah, which point? Yeah. Well, on the type, for example, I see the point that she's making, that it's a little more interesting. The Helvetica type is a little more interesting to me. But on the other hand, I tend to think that the old style bold is more quickly legible, and so I could go either way. I think I agree with the comment that I think the size of the signs is appropriate. I don't have any problem with that. I don't have any problem with the general format of the sign. Beyond that, I don't know how you resolve it.
The size of the sign made sense. When I first looked at the one with just the different styles, I happened to be at home and I said, Rebecca, which one do you like? She picked the opposite one that I liked. She was leaning towards the Bookman, and when I look at the Bookman and look through this, and I think it's challenging to read in the bold style with the amount of text that is in some of the lines. So if I look at the Winnequa Park, the amount of text in Winnequa and being in bold, a lot of those letters wash together to me. Where if I look at it in the other font, although I'm not necessarily saying that this particular font I prefer, the distance of not being bold, it helps with the readability for me. I'm not sure what the Bookman style without the bold would do, if that would look, if it would give me some more spacing so it wouldn't look like everything's scrunched together as much.
Wanakee is kind of like that, except for it's not all
Which one's Wanakee? Is that the last one?
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go
Yep.
ahead.
The part with the upper and lowercase, I think readability on some of the other signs of how the upper and lower get used. On some of the signs, I think it works. Other signs, as pointed out with the Middleton one, I think you have a problem with it. But if I look at the Wanakee one, the use of upper and lower doesn't bother me nearly as much because it doesn't feel like it has to stay in line. So I'm okay with all caps, but I like the idea of having the lead-in character enlarged slightly. The part with the seagull extending beyond the sign edge, I agree with that. Of if there was a way to keep it within the sign, that would be preference, or to determine if it's needed.
Now, Mr. Ganser brought up the Middleton sign where the G and the Y, but we don't have those underlines, and I'm wondering what it would look like if we had upper and lower, since we don't have those underlines that...
Well, just look at the Q.
Right. I don't think it would be a problem.
Q doesn't have to put on very far. That's not like a Y.
But what I'm wondering is, should we see the Monona sign with upper and lower in the two different styles?
It would be lovely, then they could both be here together.
And we could have, yeah. Does it sound like a winner?
I love that
I'd like to
idea.
get this done in 2015.
I understand. I was trying to find a picture of my phone down at Beloit. I mean, these things are just big. Every community I go in, they're good size. I don't think ours is oversized at 5'8". They're just, it's the way they are.
It's the same size as the Middleton one.
Right.
Which again, I emphasize is on a downtown Middleton, 25 miles an hour, 2 lanes, very pedestrian oriented. And that alone concerned me that these might not be big enough for Monona Drive.
Well, they also have them on University Avenue, which is 4-lane, 35 mile per hour.
Not on the 4-lane.
As you get closer to the Walgreens and that area.
So we've got, the size of the sign's okay. The seagull problems?
I'm going to just muddy the water. If we have a seagull, I kind of like the flare of the wing going off the sign. I think if we're going to have a seagull, I like that.
It's a silver eagle.
Oh, well, if we're a silver eagle.
Actually, some of the signs we have the wing like that, don't they?
Yeah, like the city entrance signs.
Right. So it's consistent with that. And so do we want to see some examples of upper lower font, or are we comfortable with what's in front of us to make a decision today?
Well, upper and lower font, please.
Or upper and lower case, sorry. Different fonts and upper and lower case.
I don't think the wing going out, but I think the scale of the sign in relation to a couple of inches that it's relieved from the rest of the sign, I think it could go, in my opinion. And I like Arial font, for the record.
Arial?
Yes.
I don't have that one.
We can use that.
So Dale, does that mean you're gonna add landscape architects to your list of the 40s?
Well, they're included.
Subset?
I meant to include them
Let's,
at the beginning.
we're getting punchy here. Let's, if we're not ready to make a decision tonight, do we want to see some other samples? And City Administrator Marsh is pointing out that he'd like to get this done within.
It was just a joke.
All right, so.
I like Dale's comment about making the lead-in letter bigger and then using all caps, that works for him. I agree with Sharon's comment that having that first one a little bigger, whether it's caps in lowercase or a bigger and a little smaller caps, either one would work for me. I think the feeling of that, I like the readability of it better.
Well, I'm going to suggest that we have some samples of what we discussed tonight so we can get together and make a final decision.
And confirm that they can both be here at the same time.
Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
All right, do we need to table this?
Move to table.
Second. Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All righty then. 7, reports of staff and commission members. Staff report regarding the status of
Chair
development
Bussey.
projects. Yes.
You said all those in favor.
Aye.
And then-
Say aye. All those opposed? Mr.
Nay.
Thank you. All right. Staff report regarding status of
Next meetings are April 13th and April 27th. The survey is going to be, comprehensive plan survey is going to be open on Monday, March 30th. There will be a press release in this Thursday's newspaper. I have hard copies ready for the different public locations we talked about, and I'm going to be doing an email and social media thing to get it out there, posted around town. So survey's moving ahead. Housing element needs to come back still. Dixie Cow will come back again. We have a new proposal at 2704 Royal Avenue, the former H&H. Royal Gates Auto Body purchased the property a couple of years ago and are coming forward with plans. Staff expressed some concerns with just storage of autos out there and screening of those and the quality of the architecture on a highly visible part of the city, so they were aware of those major concerns and are going to be coming for a pre-hearing conference.
I'm sorry, I missed the address.
The old H&H building out by your office.
Right on the off ramp there.
5809 Monona Drive is La Bamba. I think the user coming in is still confidential, but they'll be here April 13th for a pre-hearing conference, and that would be a redevelopment of the site. What else? Oh, and on the waterfront redevelopment project, April 6th, there will be a joint meeting of the CDA and the City Council. I believe it'll be in closed session because we'll be discussing project finances. But that project will soon go public after that. So April 6th, joint meeting with CDA and City Council. And then from there, we'll be going to CDA with a draft master plan, TID number 9 report, and progressing with some public input opportunities on the draft plan.
Thank you. 7B, Planning Commission request for information regarding the project. Seeing none. None. Going once, going twice.
Move adjournment.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
We had some
Thanks all.
Take care.
Can I ask you, discussing that